We're all used to using safety equipment in our daily lives. We wear seatbelts when we drive. We use PFDs when we're in a boat. At work, we wear safety glasses to protect our vision. And in some environments, we use hearing protection and wear hard hats. But there are other pieces of safety equipment designed to protect against a danger that's easy to overlook. The danger is hazardous energy, and the safety equipment is a lock and key. Lockout tagout violations typically rank in the top 10 of all cited violations by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA. And being cited for a violation can be expensive to your company, but not nearly as expensive as losing a finger, a hand, an arm, even a life. In this program, we'll talk about lockout tagout rules, the types of employees specifically mentioned in the regulations, and the training requirements for each one. We'll define hazardous energy and discuss some specific examples. We'll hear from experts in the field and demonstrate important lockout tagout procedures. So let's get started. Lockout tagout is regulated by OSHA under the Control of Hazardous Energy Standard, which is commonly referred to as the Lockout Tagout Standard. The standard requires that companies have written lockout tagout procedures, employees are trained in these procedures, periodic inspections are conducted, and records are kept to document compliance. The goal of these procedures is to prevent injury and death from the unexpected energization, startup, or release of hazardous energy from any piece of equipment while it's being maintained or repaired. Many lockout tagout accidents and injuries are the result of someone taking a shortcut or skipping a step when servicing a piece of machinery. The employee may not recognize the potential for injury, or perhaps the employee doesn't fully understand the lockout tagout procedure for the machine. Maybe the employee doesn't recognize the need for lockout tagout for a quick repair, or maybe the employee is simply ignoring lockout tagout procedures in a misguided attempt to save time. Whatever the reason, the consequences can be devastating.
The consequences of them could be possibly, getting hurt, serious injury. As much as we don't want to say it, a death could happen, whether it could be an electrical problem, a hydraulic problem, anything mechanical. If they ignore it or try to take a shortcut out of it, we try to keep our employees safe as we can, and that's why maintenance supervisors are one of the only people that deal with the lockout tagouts and have the authority to do that. And we kind of keep our machinists, away from the machine when maintenance is being performed.
The lockout tagout standard mandates 3 categories of employees who must be trained in lockout tagout: authorized employees, affected employees, and other employees. Authorized employees are those individuals responsible for initiating the lockout tagout process and who physically apply locks and tags to the machines being repaired or serviced. A mechanic or maintenance technician who does the hands-on work of repairing, installing, or calibrating production machinery would be an example of an authorized employee. The employer must supply the locks and tags to the authorized employees, and the authorized employees are the only ones who can apply and remove lockout or tagout devices. The devices they use must clearly identify them as the authorized employee who applied the device. Authorized employees must be trained to recognize the applicable hazardous energy sources. They must know the magnitude of the energy available in the workplace, and they must follow the company's written lockout tagout procedures. Affected employees are those who usually operate the machines being locked out. Obviously, if one of these individuals removes a lock or tag, the result for someone servicing the machine could be disastrous. Therefore, affected employees must be trained in the purpose and use of hazardous energy control procedures. Affected employees must not be permitted to help authorized employees during service work, and they cannot service or adjust the machines they operate. If an affected employee needs to perform maintenance or adjust machinery, then he or she becomes an authorized employee and must undergo proper training to perform the procedures that apply to authorized employees. The final category of employees involved with lockout tagout are other employees. These are individuals who may spend some of their workday in production areas, but usually work in areas away from machine operation. They may see equipment that's locked or tagged out. Workers that fit the other employee category must be instructed about lockout tagout procedures and know not to attempt to restart or re-energize any locked out or tagged out machine.
There's three categories of employees when it comes to lockout. There is the authorized employee, there's affected employees, and there's a class that's called others. The authorized employee, very important. He has been trained on how lockout tagout works, and he has a padlock that has been assigned to him so that he may lock out things. The affected person is the one who maybe is running the machine, and because they can't do their job, they are affected. They're the most important one because they may be getting in the way, they may be waiting, they may be curious as getting something done. Others happen to be everybody else in the plant. What's really important about them, humans are curious, and so everybody will wander over and say, hey, what's going on? Those people need to stay out of the mix because they can do something that they shouldn't be doing. The training is extremely important, so each one of those class of employees knows exactly what's expected of them and know what's prohibited for them to do while they're there.
OSHA requires specific and unique lockout tagout procedures for each machine that a company has in its facility, from the most complex multi-operation machine to the simplest. Any machine that has the potential to release hazardous energy must be addressed in the procedures. In addition to providing written procedures, employers must train their employees, as well as conduct and document periodic inspections of their lockout tagout procedures. When is lockout tagout required? It's required anytime you might be at risk for injury from the unexpected release of hazardous energy while servicing equipment. This includes activities such as constructing, installing, setting up, inspecting, modifying, maintaining, or servicing machines or equipment. Some examples of tasks needing lockout tagout protection include lubrication, cleaning, unjamming, adjusting, and performing tool changes. It's important to mention that while lockout tagout is not required for normal production operations, it is required when someone needs to remove or bypass a guard or other safety device, or when an employee needs to place his or her hand or other body part into a machine's point of operation. Earlier, we noted that the regulations refer to hazardous energy. Common sense would tell you that any energy source has the potential of being hazardous if it unexpectedly energizes a machine that's being serviced. Forms of hazardous energy include electrical, mechanical, hydraulic, pneumatic, chemical, thermal, and steam. Even gravity presents the potential for machine parts to fall or move and cause an injury. The flow of energy to a machine is controlled by operating energy-isolating devices. These are manually operated circuit breakers, disconnect switches, manually operated line valves, and machine blocks. However, you should know that there are also control devices that manage energy flow but don't protect against the unexpected transmission or release of energy for lockout tagout purposes. They are not considered energy-isolating devices. These include push buttons, toggle switches, dials, emergency stops, and interlock barrier guards.
A perfect example would be your common light at home. It's controlled by the light switch. The light switch stops power at that point, but there is also power at the light. The circuit becomes completed when you put the light on. So if you do work up at the light, there is a chance that you could become electrocuted. The energy control would be if you went to the circuit breaker for that light, flip that off, there's absolutely no power to the switch and absolutely no power to the light, and you cannot become injured when that happens.
Lockout is defined as the process of physically placing a lock on all energy isolating devices for a machine being serviced to ensure that it cannot be operated. It's important to recognize that some machines have multiple sources of energy. Electrical and pneumatic energy used simultaneously, for example. We'll talk about tagout in a moment, but know that lockout is preferred to tagout, and OSHA regulations require you to lock out any piece of equipment that can be locked out. Locks used for the lockout procedure must be provided by your employer and must physically hold the energy isolating device in the off or safe position. To accomplish this, locks may be used in conjunction with circuit breakers, valve covers, blocks, chains, blank flanges, or bolted slip blinds. Tagout is defined as placing a special tag on the energy isolating device of a machine or piece of equipment being serviced to indicate that the device must stay in the off position until the tag is removed by the authorized employee who applied the tag. Tagout is less certain than lockout because it only gives a visual and written warning not to restore energy to the equipment. It does not physically prevent energy from being restored. Tagout devices must be clearly marked with the authorized employee's name and must contain a clear warning statement such as "do not operate." And it's a best practice to include this warning in any additional languages spoken at the workplace. Remember, if lockout can be used, it should be used. Tagout is used in those instances when lockout is not possible, or when an employer can demonstrate that tagout, along with other protective measures, is as effective as lockout. These other measures can include removal of a valve handle, removing a fuse, or shutting off additional isolating circuit elements.
The importance of using lockout, again, is so that you aren't unexpectedly injured when something happens. The hard part is explained to people. Many times they say to me, well, who would come and turn on the switch? It's very difficult to get people to understand this. Don't think that way. Think in terms of nothing is impossible. And therefore, if you do make sure you lock out every single time, it is impossible to be injured.
Now that we define lockout and tagout and discuss the significant dangers of hazardous energy, let's see how lockout-tagout is used. The authorized employee begins with information about the specific machine or piece of equipment to be serviced. What types of energy are involved? How much energy is involved? What are the hazards and risks related to this energy? And remember, there may be more than one type of energy involved in a single machine, so these questions should be answered for all forms of energy present. Prior to lockout, the authorized employee should notify all affected employees. Then the machine is powered down using the established shutdown procedure. Next, the authorized employee performing the lockout locates all the energy isolating devices for the machine and places these devices in the off or safe position. Finally, these energy isolating devices are locked in the off or safe position with the application of a lock for each source of energy. Remember, the lock must be provided by the employer, and the authorized employee will have the key under their control while he or she is servicing the machine. It's also a common practice for the lockout-tagout process to include a durable tag with the name of the authorized employee who locked out the machine. If the lock itself is marked to identify the authorized employee, then a tag is not necessary. Even though all the sources of hazardous energy are locked out, it's still not yet safe to service the machine. Before putting hands or other body parts into the machine, all stored energy must be released. This may include bleeding off air pressure, draining lines, discharging capacitors, or simply letting the machine cool down. The final step is to verify that the machine is in a zero energy state. This can be done by attempting to start up the machine, verifying zero readings on pressure and temperature gauges, or using test equipment such as applying an electrical meter to ensure that a capacitor is discharged. Having completed all these tasks, it is now safe for the authorized employee to service the machine. After work on the machine is completed, the authorized employee initiates the lock removal process by replacing any guards that were removed during the repairs and removes all tools and supplies. Next, he determines that the machine is ready to operate by inspecting the work area to make sure all materials and anyone nearby is a safe distance away. Now it's safe to remove the locks from the energy isolating devices and restore energy to the machine. Finally, the authorized employee notifies the affected employees that the machine is ready to operate. Earlier, we mentioned that the employer must provide the locks used during the lockout procedure. These locks, along with any tags that may be used for tagout, must meet certain requirements. Locks must be used exclusively for lockout. They can't be used for other purposes, such as securing toolboxes. They must be standard throughout the facility by having the same color, size, or shape so that they can be easily identified by employees. And they must be durable. Tags that are used for tagout must contain a clearly worded warning, such as danger or do not operate, must include the authorized employee's name, and must be attached with a non-reusable self-locking cable tie.
We want to be consistent with our procedures. You want to follow the procedures accurately every single time. In the event that you would take a shortcut, you may be putting yourself at risk to yourself or a coworker while taking that shortcut. And in the process, it may not be a shortcut at all. And once again, you may be putting yourself at risk.
Under OSHA's regulations, there are certain exceptions to lockout tagout requirements worth covering. One of the exceptions